Hey, welcome to Craig Walker Coaching. This is your home for learning to win over your crippling self-doubt. I hope to become your trusted expert to help you live the life that you were born to love. Today, I want to talk to you about the secret to building a great marriage. Here's a question. Are you experiencing the marital bliss that you imagined when you got engaged? If you are, congratulations. You're in the minority. But if you're not, welcome to the crowd. Now, having been a pastor for 35 years, I've done my share of premarital counseling. Couples come in with smiles, holding hands, their imaginations running wild of their future life together, and they're building their happily ever after. But I've also done my share of counseling for those same couples that when the honeymoon had worn off, and for some of them, it started wearing off on the honeymoon, instead of coming in holding hands and being all smiles with wild imagination about their future and building their happily ever after, they come in cold. They come in distant. They come in and like they've begun to believe that happily ever after, that's just a fairy tale. Well, I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be a fairy tale. It can be your reality. The secret to building a great marriage is to build a great identity. Listen. A wounded identity is at the heart of your struggle. A healthy identity will be at the heart of healing and happiness. Now, I need to explain something before we jump into our talk. When I talk about identity with Christians, often I get this pushback like, oh, I'm a Christian, my identity is in Christ. And while I'm sure that's true on some level, I've observed that there is a disconnect between what people profess and what people practice. Now, what we have to do is to recognize that disconnect and deal with it if we're going to build a great relationship. Now, this is going to make more sense to you when we move ahead. I'm going to contrast in this talk today the old life. That's what I'll talk about today, part one. This is a two-part series. And then next week, we'll talk about that new life and that new identity. Today, I'm going to contrast that life apart from Christ. And then next week, we'll talk about that life in Christ. So let's jump in. Let's get started. Here's the life apart from Christ. This is the heart of our problem. Let's go back to the beginning, the origin of our relationship struggles. God created Adam and Eve, gave them a role to fulfill and a command to obey, and the role was simple. Just, fill the earth, make more little bitty Adams and little bitty Eves and teach them to love God, and they'll manage His creation. But then He gave them commands. He said, do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God warned. He said, in the day that you eat its fruit, you will surely die. Now, you know the story. They ate and they died. And the scriptures tells us that at that moment their eyes were open. At the moment they ate, at the moment they died. They suddenly felt shame at their nakedness. When they ate, something in them died. And with death came that sense of shame. Now, in my course, Truly a Masterpiece, I go into much more detail showing you the consequences of their decision and spelling out to you exactly what happened. But today it's enough to know that shame is that feeling that something's wrong with me. Something's missing, something's broken, or something's so deeply ingrained in me that I just can't change. I'm stuck. Shame is a broken identity. Shame whispers, you're not enough. Shame shouts that you're not worthy of love. When humans sinned, they didn't lose their need for love. They lost their sense of love and their belief that they are worthy of love. Shame, it's a universal problem. When humans brought sin into the world, we brought a sense of shame. Ever since shame came into the world, humans have been they've been looking for what they believe they're unworthy to receive. How do you think that's going to work out for us? We just have to look to history to see. Love is still a basic human need. It's right up there with the need to breathe. As long as you can breathe, you don't even think about your next breath. But the moment you can't, that's all you think about. That's the way it is with love. Shame shouts, you're not worthy of love. And the need from within, blinded from God's love, fights back and says, oh yes, I am. I'll prove it to you. Shame is the birthplace of all that's evil. At the heart of your struggle and mine is the drive to prove that you are enough. All the while, you're believing that you're not enough. Does anything good come from that combination? Well, maybe you can relate to my story and to Debbie's story. Debbie's coming out of silence today to tell you part of our story, and she's worthy of your attention.
When Craig and I were dating, I wanted to feel secure and to be accepted. So I went along with most anything that he wanted, trying not to have any opinions or preferences. I just wanted to be that perfect girl for him. I came to know Christ while we were dating, and I was just 15 years old. I don't really remember anyone ever teaching the Bible, and I never read it for myself. But I knew intellectually that God loved me, Jesus died for my sins, and I was going to heaven when I died. But that was about all I really knew. After we were married, I kept trying to be what I thought Craig wanted me to be, so I would feel that love and acceptance. For most of our marriage, I tried to be flexible and not cause any waves in our relationship. I was really afraid to be myself because I was afraid he wouldn't love the real me. Our attempts at intimacy often turned into fights, and just the evening was a disaster. And then I knew I'd let him down again, and then I felt like a failure.
Well, my story is not a lot different than Debbie's. When we were dating, I tried desperately to prove to her that I was enough, that I was Mr. Wonderful. And this is weird, but it's true. After we were married, there was a shift. I unintentionally expected her to prove to me that I was enough. Looking back, I know I was asking her to do what was impossible. When I became a Christian, our marriage changed, my relationship with her changed, everything really changed. It got better. And I accepted my new identity in Christ on some level. But I got to admit, at the core, there was a great disconnect between what I professed and what I practiced. My insecurity, my not feeling enough, my sense of shame, it showed up in a lot of ways. It showed up in our communication. Often I kept her in the dark about my true feelings, my thoughts, my desires. And when we did try to communicate, we usually resulted or ended in an argument. She felt misunderstood. She felt controlled. I felt disrespected. I felt unloved. Like she said, it showed up in our sexual intimacy. This is terribly embarrassing to admit. But in the bedroom, I wanted her to make me feel like the man that I didn't believe that I was. Those were two of the big areas, I guess. But in full disclosure, it showed up in really every area, even the silliest things in our life, like playing the game of cards. If we played cards, which we did quite often, and she won, which she did most of the time, I got angry. My identity couldn't handle losing as I often did. Well, here's a question. Can you identify with our struggle? Does any of this make sense to you? Are you willing to accept that your identity could be at the heart of your struggle? If you can, I think you're really going to enjoy what we share with you next week. Well, until next week, may God help you to live the life that you were born to live.